Hello, everyone. So,
Yes.
yeah, nice to see you tonight. So, yeah, we are going to discuss dividend policy or distribution policy. Uh, that has been an important policy, one of the most important policies for the last maybe 2 or 3 decades. However, we have to admit that the importance and also uh, power of the policy has been decreasing lately because of the I think changes in organizational structure and also the uh, investing and financing decisions that have to adapt to modern times, right? So things change, right? You see that merger and acquisition, the M&A activities could be found extensively during 1980s and even to the late 1990s. But you see right now it has flattened out and activities have changed into more venture type uh, activities or business execution. So again, things will change, and this topic remains a classical and traditional theme in finance and economics, and we'll see why in a little while. But again, the importance of the distribution policy or dividend policy in the past had been more pronounced, right? Has been more profound in the past. Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay, so we are looking at the distribution policy. Uh, that's why in 1970s or 80s, we in the perspective of like finance or economics people, we had three important decisions. But nowadays uh, we only claim to have like two important decisions, right? Like what we saw in the earlier part of our course. For a while. So let me try here. Okay, so well, I'm fixing my pen. So in the past, we knew the investing decision. So remember, right, from the earlier chapter of our course, investing decision uh, is on the asset side, right? We have the assets, and we are making an investing decision. And on the right hand side of our balance sheet, we have the financing decision, right? So, but in 1950s or 60s, we actually admitted the third decision. This very important decision was called dividend policy, the dividend policy decision in the past. But again, the the power or the importance of distribution policy or dividend policy has declined substantially in the 20th century, but still it remains a classical thing to look at, right? And we have to now from the practical side, we know that in some countries the distribution policy is more crucial or more is more of concern than that in other countries or in certain countries. Okay, so distribution policy deals with the level of distributions, right? The amount of distributions, and then the form, right? Dividend versus stock repurchase. You know that firms are doing stock repurchases more and more intensively for the last maybe 1 decade or so, and we'll see why. Right? So stock repurchase or stock repurchases have dominated actually dividend payment for the last 1 decade or so. And also the third question would be the stability of the distribution. Okay, so again, even without going too far into the technicalities and some useful models, we know that the distribution policy talks about how we will distribute our net income, right? Fortunately, my pen doesn't work, but okay. So maybe I'll use Microsoft Word instead. Okay, so we have operating profit, right? And assuming you have your other income or loss, right? So you have your EBIT, and then of course after the earnings before interest and tax or taxes, you have your interest expense, right? And then you have your earnings before tax. Then you deduct your tax or taxes, then you get your earnings after tax or net income. Okay, so what to do with the net income, right? That's the essence of the distribution policy, right? How much you pay out as dividend, or how much you use the proportion of the net income to repurchase your stock, and consequently how much you would save, right? You would retain as retained earnings or corporate savings. Okay, so distribution policy, and you see the patterns over time. So it's very interesting to see that the percentage of net income paid out as dividend has been stable at around 26 to 28%. So let's say 30%, right? And dividend payout rates have fallen, whereas the stock repurchase or stock repurchases have increased or uh, have been more a norm, right, in modern corporation. So if they have money to distribute, they will most likely prioritize the stock repurchase instead of dividend payout. So repurchases also now total more dollars in distribution than dividends, right? You see, another fact, very interesting one. Smaller percentage of companies now pay dividends, right? Especially you see in young firms, startup firms, definitely they will not make like dividend payouts, or even if they do, they'll pay only a little part or little chunk of the net income as dividend, right? And even if they have money, they'll prefer to do the stock repurchase instead of paying out as dividends. So dividend payouts have been more concentrated in a smaller number of large and mature firms. So this is quite making sense, right? Quite logical. Because if the firm is older, any idea if your firm is older, why is it that you have a higher chance of paying dividends? What is the main factor that comes to play there? It's a growth opportunity, right? Growth opportunity. So if a firm gets older, in the sense that it becomes more mature, becoming more mature doesn't mean decreasing, right? More mature means you're at the peak of your potential. Of course, you have less growth opportunity at that point because you have been so big, right? Imagine if you started from a small company like yeah, anything, maybe G2 News, G2 News, right? G2 News is different from the Tick News, right? But someday maybe this G2 News will improve and will reach its peak, right? Peak potential, and it will be at the again uh, at the optimum level, and it will have less and less or fewer opportunities to grow further, right? So you see the fact here, based on research, some industries show higher dividend yield. So dividend yield is the dividend amount divided by stock price. Okay, so dividend yield. So we call it yield, right? It's always a ratio of dividend amount divided by stock price. So you see some industries paid, this is in January 2016, right? Some industries paid relatively relatively higher dividend yield, such as what? Electric utilities. And you could guess, right? Electric utilities, leisure or recreation, and then what else? Tobacco, right? Such industries are more mature, right? They're more mature. Of course, they have like less opportunity, uh, but they have enjoyed like huge amount of assets, huge amount of revenues as well, right? So you can imagine like electric utilities, right? Sells electricity to people. And what differentiates the electric utility companies is only the source or the sources of electricity, right? For example, in the United States, there are a lot of electric companies. Of course, in Indonesia, we only have one. It's like a monopolistic market, so you cannot complain anything, right? If you complain, you say, oh, they will just tell you, okay, please find another company that will serve you. And obviously nothing, right? There's no other company. But in the US, there are a lot of electric companies, so we could change. And even within one electric company, it will offer you potential sources of electricity. So the cheapest would be like coal, right? It's sourced from coal. It's dirty, but yeah, students don't care, right? So when I was student, obviously I chose the coal, right? Coal the Chose the coal as my electric or electricity source because it was the cheapest. And then above that, we had the some other sources, and of course, the most expensive one will be the green energy. Right, energy is the most expensive one. And rich people they try to help the planet. Of course, right? They want to encourage the like cleaner energy, right? Greener world, greener earth, and something like that. They would choose maybe the more expensive or even the most expensive source, right? Such as the green energy. So you could imagine that electric utilities and leisure or creation, they have like fewer possibilities to go further into expansion or into other opportunities, but they have been enjoying again the great amount of revenues and also profit, right? Okay, so compared to the like more modern industries like software, you see here software with a dividend yield of 1.35% in January 2016. Relatively small, right? Software is evolving all the time, right? Innovations and inventions happen maybe every minute, every hour. What else? What other industries with smaller dividend yields? Banking, yeah. So software, banking, they're still evolving, right? Especially with the emergence of fintech and some other technological equipment or advancement for financial institutions. Okay, so one more time, we call this one the life cycle theory, life cycle theory of dividend payment, life cycle, right? So if you are young, uh, maybe you're a startup company, then you need a lot of money, right? Obviously, you need a lot of money to grow or even to survive. So definitely you will not pay a high like dividend payout ratio. So dividend yield would be relatively low when you are young, especially if you are in the startup stage or in the acceleration stage. Cannot pay a lot of dividend. But when you grow faster, and finally you reach the stage of maturity. So you become more mature firm. Then you have a higher chance to pay a higher dividend payout ratio because you have plenty of money. You enjoy the stern and also dominant position maybe in the industry, or maybe not the most dominant, but maybe you're in the top 3 or top 5, then you still enjoy uh, a big proportion of, or big amount of money because of the big cake in the industry. And then you, of course, you have the higher chance to pay out your net income as dividend, or you repurchase your stock, right? So we call it like life cycle model or life cycle theory. So the younger the firm, uh, the lower the possibility that the firm will pay a higher dividend payout, and vice versa. So now we'll see the three dividend theories. Three dividend theories. It's a very interesting one. We look back to the history of finance actually. So if you watch the video on, or the videos on portfolio theory, you'll see that actually the separation of finance from economics only happened in 1950s. To be precise, in 1952. Right? So there was uh, quite the beginning period where finance really stood out as its own field, right? Rather than being part of, or being pure part of economics. So dividend is also considered part of the early history or earlier history of finance. So the first theory came out in 1961. Right? 1961. So the two people, very famous people until today, and of course both of them have passed away. We have Merton Miller, right, and Franco Modigliani. Okay, so Miller and Modigliani, see the last names, okay? So we'll reduce the names to the last names only. So Miller and Modigliani. So look carefully, right? This is Miller and Modigliani. So tomorrow we are going to talk about capital structure. And in the capital structure theory, we will see Modigliani and Miller. See, right? They're the same people, they're the same names, but the dominant force was different, right? So for the dividend policy paper, Miller was the first author. So Miller and Modigliani, so in 1961, they started the discussion on this policy, right? They called it dividend policy in the past. So 1961, right? Very first. And Miller and Modigliani were proposing a theory named irrelevance. Okay, irrelevance theory. So we'll see here, irrelevance theory. So again, this was the main proponents of the irrelevance theory were Miller and Modigliani, right? Miller and Modigliani. So you see on the slide there, it's actually, it should be reversed, right? Miller and Modigliani, although they are the same, just the same people, but Miller and Modigliani based on the order of the author. So irrelevance theory was made, or was postulated using a lot of assumptions, right? So you see the fourth point of the slide is unrealistic assumptions, but So we have to interpret this carefully, right? So they made use of many unrealistic assumptions, such as what? Such as that was the world without tax, right? World without tax, the world without tax, and then uh, the market was perfect, so no market friction. Market friction means imperfection, so no market friction whatsoever. And then people had homogeneous expectations about an asset and some other unrealistic assumptions, right? You can see here, right? No brokerage costs, right? No taxes, no brokerage costs, and many other uh, unrealistic assumptions. So why should we pay attention to a theory that was made using unrealistic assumptions? So this is very important concept, right? So unrealistic assumptions are actually very useful because if we don't have this kind of assumptions, we never know whether we never know as to whether something that we are talking about, something that we are looking at, is really affected uh, by a variable or certain variables that we are interested in. So let me give you an analogy, okay, imaginary situation, right, or a hypothetical situation. So let's say, who is here? Let me see who's number one list here. Onki, yeah, Onki, number one on the list, right? So let's say we want to prove a point, right? Uh, we want to know whether Onki's exam performance is affected by like the milk that he has been drinking. Okay, so we want to know the effect of milk drinking on Onki's exam performance. So if we do nothing, we just uh, you know just collect his exam grades or something like that, and it turns out that we see excellent performances by Onki in many exams, right? And then we conclude that it must be because of milk drinking. That could be misleading, right? Because you never know what really affected or what really affect Onki's exam performance or performances, right? So we never know without the assumptions. So in econometrics, we call this like control variables. We need to control many things, right? So how can we know? So the an extreme example would be this, right? So we ask Onki not to get out of his house. Okay. So we imprison Onki, of course, in his own house, right? Or maybe to be more precise, in his own room, right? So we limit his movement. So we don't allow Onki to get out of his room. So we make sure that he doesn't do something else, right? Because before in the previous scenario, we got a lot of excellent grades of Onki, but we never know, right? What really affected Onki's performances? Maybe he studied more, or he consumed other uh, like high vitamin food or anything like that, right? Or uh, he had maybe more advanced computer system. He could study faster or something like that. So we never knew. Now we want to make sure, right? So we imprison Onki in his own room. Right? So to be more convincing, we tie him up, right? We tie him up on a chair. So obviously he couldn't move at all, right? So we tie him up on a chair and then we give him milk, right? We give him milk to drink. And then after some time, then we let him do the exams. Okay, so now we want to see, right? So we know exactly if he does well in exams. Obviously, it is because of the milk drinking because he did nothing else. Right? He did nothing else. He didn't study. He didn't even go out of his house. He didn't have any access to his computers and something like that. Right? So this is the function of unrealistic assumptions, right? So although the assumptions are unrealistic, actually we tie down we tie down the potential theory, right, or potential lemmas to make sure that what we are talking about is really affected or impacted by a certain variable of interest that we are looking at. Right? Now you understand, right? So the unrealistic assumptions, of course, we admit that, the world without tax, what world is that? That doesn't exist, right? It's super unrealistic. The world without brokerage costs, the world without market friction, all of them are unrealistic. But again, we do that to see whether dividend policy is related to firm value. So we want to see this, right? Is there any relation between the firm value and the dividend policy or dividend payment, right? So we tie down many assumptions, right? Many situations. So we want to find out whether firm value is really or purely affected or influenced by dividend policy, purely and solely, in fact, affected by dividend policy, right? So we want to make sure that other factors don't come to the scenes, right? Don't come to play. That's why we make a lot of unrealistic assumptions. And what do they find? What do they find here? They find that dividend policy is irrelevant. That's why we call it irrelevance theory, right? Irrelevance theory, because they postulate that dividend policy is irrelevant to the firm value. Very interesting one, right? So they're saying this is like irrelevant, right? And why is that so? Yeah, according to Miller and Modigliani, right, the irrelevance theory, they're saying that dividend policy is irrelevant to firm value because they're saying that everyone, right, every individual and also every entity, every institution could make his or her own dividend, right? So they call it the homemade dividends. Because they're saying that everybody or even every organization could make his or her own dividends, right? So they called it homemade dividends. So how to do it? Homemade, right? So you make it by yourself. How do you do it? It's very easy, right? So let's assume that here, second on the list, Robbie, right? Robbie. So let's say Robbie is an investor, a stockholder that likes a huge amount of dividend, right? So Robbie, right? So likes a huge amount, right?
Yep.
Okay, now the reality is that one particular firm that Robbie has been investing in is paying a little amount of dividend. So the firm is paying too little. So what can Robbie do? If he wants more money, he wants a huge amount of dividend actually, but the firm he's investing in is paying too little, right? So he's not satisfied with the amount
Sell
of
his
dividend.
stock.
Yeah, you can sell. Yeah, Robbie can sell his stocks, right? So Robbie just sell his stocks. Right? So hey, easy stock of the firm. Okay, so yeah, Robbie could just sell his stock. So he'll get the amount of money that he wants, okay? So sorry, I will turn off the mic for now. Yeah. Right? So Robbie could just sell his stock. What about if the firm is paying too much? If the firm is paying too much, what can Robbie do now? So more than sufficient, more than what he wants. What can he do?
Buying more stock.
Buy more stock, right? He can buy more stock. Right? So very obvious. So okay, so Robbie can buy more stock. Okay, so that's why this is called the homemade dividends, right? So what Miller and Modigliani called homemade dividends, because again, one more time, they assume that everyone could make his or her own dividend. That's why it's called homemade dividends. Okay, so this is the first classical theory of dividend policy. So it looks straightforward, but if you read the original paper, it's quite it will give you a big headache because of the mathematical building of the theory. It's quite extensive. Okay. Sorry, please mute it for now. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so the second theory is called bird in the hand theory. This sounds quite funny, right? So bird in the hand. So bird in the hand, right? So bird in the hand theory. So what does it mean here? Any idea? So bird in the hand.
Dividen lebih bernilai daripada capital gain.
That's right. So you see the name here, a bird in the hand. So something that has been in your hands, right? So you're saying that of course some investors could be patient enough to wait for their capital gains or something, but the essence of the theory says that if you have something in your hands, right, it's like bird in the hand. It has been quite real and pragmatic in your hands, right? So this theory is saying that investors prefer something before their eyes, right? Within the reach of their hands, rather than waiting for something uncertain, right? Or something that have to wait. They have to wait for a little while or for some time in the future. Okay, so you see the logic there. We have net income, right? From our earlier story, we have net income. When we make a decision, right? How much to be paid out as dividend, and then how much to be saved, right? To be retained as corporate savings or retained earnings. So maybe some people are more patient, right? They are more patient to wait. So if you save more and more money out of this, right? So you save a higher proportion of your net income as retained earnings. What is the positive consequence here? You have more savings, so you can invest more, maybe, right? Your reinvestment, your reinvestment would be more massive, right? You can expand more, you can find other opportunities and so forth, right? So you could reinvest in a higher amount. If your reinvestment is successful, what will happen? Successful project undertaking, right? Successful business unit expansion and some other things. Then your stock price will increase. And of course, if you see an increasing stock price, then you get what? Capital gain, right? Have capital gain or capital gains, right? Depending on how many stocks you have. But capital gain. So you could actually wait for this one, right? So if you're patient enough, so let's say you don't expect a higher amount of dividend, you encourage your board of directors to retain as much as possible and reinvest the money, and hopefully, again, the projects, business units, the ventures that the company is doing are successful, then the stock price will increase and you enjoy the capital gain. However, bird in the hand theory is saying that stockholders, in this case, right, stockholders prefer something more certain, right, already in their hands, They don't need to wait. And yeah, again, it's more pragmatic, right? So they like more dividend amount rather than waiting for successful business ventures, higher stock price, and finally higher amount of capital gain. A bird in the hand theory is that the famous proponents of this theory were John Lindner, right? John Lindner, and then Gordon, right? The famous proponents of the bird in the hand theory. Right? Okay, so again, what's the conclusion of this one? That investors, or in this case, stockholders, prefer a higher amount of dividends, right? Because they are more certain, right? That's why we call it a bird in the hand, right? Bird in the hand. Next classical theory on dividend policy is tax preference theory or tax effect theory. I think this is more consequential in certain countries. For example, the United States, right, compared to maybe other countries. Of course, every country has its own tax code, right? The tax code or tax law in every country would be different, right? So tax preference theory, this is also very, I think, very important in many countries. So this way is saying that the tax consequence of dividend policy could be enormous, right? Could be significant in certain countries. Let's take an example. Right? In the United States, this is very important. Right? If you see, right, if you receive dividend, you will be taxed at your tax bracket. So this will follow your tax bracket. As you know, the tax bracket is quite, of course, quite wide, but the highest tax bracket right now is about 37 or 38%. So you could imagine, right? If you are a wealthy person like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Warren Buffett or something, some people like that, most likely you have reached the highest tax bracket, right? 37 or 38%. So if companies owned by Bill Gates, right, pay a lot of dividends to him, then he would be unhappy, right? First, he doesn't need additional money, and secondly, the additional incomes will be taxed at the highest tax bracket, right? So he will be unhappy, right? So tax bracket is very important, important consideration in the United States because dividend is taxed at your tax bracket, right? At your following your ordinary tax income, right? What about the capital gain? So capital gain is quite unique, right? In the case of United States. So if you invest, your investment is still short term, right? Your stock ownership is still short term, below 12 months. Then this will follow your tax bracket. Okay, so if this is short term, this will follow your tax bracket. Okay, so there's no specialty whatsoever for short-term stock ownership. But if this is long-term, if you own the stock more than 12 months, and then you get capital gains, this is interesting, right? So this will the capital gain tax will range from 0 to 20%. Wow, this is good, right? So you see the incentive of not receiving dividend in the US, right? So if you wait longer, right? Persuade or encourage the board of directors not to pay too much dividend, but rather reinvest the money. And then hopefully, again, the ventures are successful, then the stock price will increase, right? And you enjoy the capital gain. And if you have owned the stock for more than 12 months, then your capital gain tax would be very special. It will range from 0 to 20, depending on your taxable income. Right? If your taxable income is relatively low, maybe you enjoy a 0% capital gain tax. Pretty cool, right? But even the highest tax rate for capital gain is only 20%. If you hold the stock for a long-term horizon, meaning more than 12 months, right? What about in another country? Let's take an example of Indonesia. Okay, Indonesia. What is the dividend income tax for individuals? 10%, right? 10%. For corporations, it's usually 15%. But if a corporation owns another corporation of more than 25% ownership, then the dividend income from the subsidiary would be tax-free, right? So if you own more than 25% ownership in another corporation, if your subsidiary is paying dividend to you, right? So you get the dividend income, then that would be tax-free, right? It will not be taxable. But for individuals, the tax rate, the dividend income tax is 10%. What about capital gain? Capital gain tax in Indonesia. This will be taxed for individuals. This will be taxed around 0.1%. Wow, this is like a big difference as well. So actually, in many countries, the pattern is the same, right? Dividend income tax is usually more expensive, right? More, we call it more expensive, more punishing, right? The dividend income tax is more punishing than that of capital gain, right? Everywhere in the world, but of course the numbers are different, right? See, for example, in Indonesia, the dividend income tax is 10% for individuals. For foreigners, it's about 20%, but let's say for domestic people, it's about 10%, whereas the capital gain tax is 0.1%. So again, capital gain tax is always not almost, and not always, but almost always cheaper than the dividend income tax, right? So the tax preference theory is actually very relevant, very real to many countries, right? Especially to countries where taxation is of high concern, right? People care a lot about taxation because, again, the income per capita has been quite high. They don't want to lose too much money for additional taxes that they have to pay and something like that, right? Okay, so empirical tests, right? I want you to see the last point there. A lot of findings have supported or have corroborated the tax preference hypothesis or tax preference theory, but are not conclusive, right? Because it depends on the setting of the research, right, and the place, right, the country in which we conduct the research and something like that. So it's not conclusive. Okay, but tax preference theory is more, I think, more profound, right? More, showing more evidence in many countries. Right? You saw our discussion just now, right? Although the countries are different, but the pattern is usually the same, by which the dividend income tax is usually higher than that of capital gain. So other findings, international evidence, you see here different tax laws, dividend tax penalties. This is what we say. This is what we call the punishment, right? Dividend tax punishment or penalty. So if in countries with relatively low dividend tax penalties, it means that these are countries where dividend income tax or dividend income taxes are not that high. In those countries, more companies are willing to pay higher amount of dividends. Common sense, right? If again the dividend income tax is not that punishing, then more companies are willing to pay dividends or pay higher amount of dividends. And of course, the dividend payments will be larger, right? Common sense. Yeah. But in countries with relatively high dividend income tax, then more companies will choose to repurchase stock, right, or to buy back their stocks. Okay, so this is something U.S. law courts. I will skip this one. This is also an important fact. See here, some countries with like poor investor protection, right? So poor legal system. So this being the case, they will require more dividends, right? So if the country is having like poor investor protection, obviously the stockholders will demand for a higher amount of dividends to make sure that they have the money, right? So you have bird in the hand, right? Because you're not you don't really trust the legal system in maybe in your country, in a certain country, so you want a higher dividend payout. On the other hand, maybe some countries with better or higher investor protection, okay, then they will ask for less, right? Less dividend payment. This is quite common sense, right? Because if you have like good investor protection, so you're not really worried about the anything there, right? Additional agency costs or like the illegal actions conducted by the top executive or the joint mischief, right, between top executive and the owners or something like that, that could be detrimental to like minority stockholders or something like that. So if the country is having again the good investor protection, then we will not be so much concerned about the dividend payment. So we are willing to take less dividend payout, but instead encourage the firm to reinvest, right? To save more and reinvest more. Okay, so this is quite delicate. The discussion on the law system, because it's hard to say, right? Which law system is offering, higher investor protection. So we have two types, right, in the world. Of course, the variations would be a lot. I have a lot of the subsets of a particular system or something like that. But we have at least two. What's the first one? The Roman or continental law, right? And even the continental law has been evolving, right? I think the Dutch system that Indonesia was is still, yeah, is holding or applying is more like Napoleonic Code, right? Napoleonic Code. We call it Napoleonic Code because he was, revising and also, somehow he was revising the Roman or continental type of law. So Napoleon, so he was in power for actually a short period of time, right? Maybe less than 20 years, but actually he added a lot of new and modern systems into education and also into law. That's what we call the modern continental type or Roman law as Napoleonic law, Napoleonic code, right? And if you follow the history, Napoleon also introduced the senior high school system that we know right now. I call it they call it a college and a lycée, right? So the junior high school was called college, right? College, and then the senior high school is lycée. So we had the system. So previously we didn't have such separation between the junior high and senior high. So Napoleon added into again the had some good improvements and also innovations into the education and law. What is the second one? The second one is a more classical one. We call it the Commonwealth system. So obviously the name Commonwealth, right? So it is sourced from the Great Britain, right? Great Britain. So all countries within the Commonwealth family will still use this kind of system, this kind of law system, including the United States, Singapore, even Malaysia, maybe India, right? And of course the United Kingdom, right? Wales and all related countries, right? So it's hard to say, right? Which law system is better than another? Of course, based on research, empirical evidence shows that with respect to investments and or finance and economics, Commonwealth system offers a higher level of protection for investors. Okay, but of course, we are not saying that Commonwealth law system is better than the other one. But at least for the finance and economics, the empirical findings, mostly by Laporta, a famous name in the corporate governance field. So Laporta has found a lot of empirical evidence that shows that Commonwealth system offers a higher level of investor protection compared to the continental system. But of course, we cannot say that Commonwealth system is always better than the continental system, right? And so I hope you still remember the differences, right? Or the main difference here. The continental system, who will make decisions on a case? Judges, right? Judges will make decisions, right? And who will decide the severity of punishments? For example, if a subject is determined or is decided to be guilty, then who will determine the severity of punishment? Also, the judges. Okay, so minimum we have like sometimes one, sometimes three, right? Or maybe in a more serious case, we might have five or something like that. But no, the judges will decide on the guilty or not guilty decision, and they will also determine the severity of the punishment, right? So judges are very powerful there. So what's the potential problem there? Of course, the potential problem would be collusion and then bribery, right? The classical or the classical problem in the continental system, right? Maybe bribery, gratification, right? Or some other names. What about the Commonwealth system? Who will decide on a case? Jury, right? The jury that has a lot of members, maybe 7. In a more serious case, maybe nine members, right? So we call the team like jury, right? 9 members, maybe 11, maybe 15, and so forth. But let's say 7 or 9, right? 9 members. Who will determine the severity of punishment if a subject is pronounced to be guilty? Then the judge, right? The judge will determine the punishment, the severity of punishment, the level of punishment. But decision would be made by the jury. Let's say 7 or 9 members. So what is the problem here? Jury, can you bribe the jury? Yes, you can, but this is very dangerous, right? Super dangerous. It's hardly possible. Even hardly thinkable, How can you bribe like 7 members or 9 members? And right, if you try to bribe, let's say 9 members, and even one of them is reporting you, right? One of them is unhappy and reporting you to the police or to the court, then you will go to jail for 250 years. 250 years in jail. And of course, if you're Captain America, you might go out alive, right? Maybe you're frozen, but normal person will not go out alive. You'll die there, right?
Yes.
Like life sentence, right? Unless you're Captain America, you're frozen and you can get out. But again, 250 years in jail, no joke, right? So nobody would be crazy enough or brave enough to try to bribe jury members, right? That's crazy, right? If you are found out, even one member is reporting you, then you are gone, right? You go to jail forever, a life sentence. But this system is not perfect, right? So the bribery might be minimum, right? Bribery might be minimum, but what is now? What is the potential problem here? The potential problem here in this system is the unfair or unbalanced, right? Ability to, this is ability, okay, to hire lawyers. Now here's the problem, right? Good lawyers will cost a lot, right? So if you don't have money, you have to rely on the, what's that, pro bono lawyers, right? Pro bono, or we call it what, the LBH, right? US version of LBH, the pro bono lawyers. So most likely they are new lawyers, inexperienced, and yeah, relatively low quality, or still low quality, right? So maybe someday they will improve, but when they defend you, maybe they're still having like minimum experiences, right? Or something like that. So unfair or unbalanced ability to hire lawyers. So if you are a big corporation or you are a super wealthy person, then definitely you can hire top lawyers. And top lawyers, they really have good capability, because you see the system here, right? Jury members are making decisions based on something presented in the court, right? So they cannot use their personal feelings, personal hunches, or compassionate. What's that? The decisions, right? Compassionate decision making, the Samaritan style or something like that, right? You can only watch that in Korean movies, okay? In real court, they cannot do that, right? So jury members have to make decisions based on whatever presented to them in the court. So you see, good lawyers can reframe any scenario, any situation, because they have a lot of they have excellent excellent arguments. They have a lot of experiences and something like that. So let's say negligent mother, okay? So negligent mother, this mother went to a party, right? Leaving her daughter alone in her house, right? And then suddenly her daughter went out of the house, went into forest, and then went missing, right? Several days later, the daughter was found dead, right? So the mother was arrested, of course. The mother will be arrested. But let's say this lady has a lot of money, so she could hire good lawyers. Or maybe another possibility is this case would become like nationally televised, okay? So top lawyers are willing to fight or to defend this mother without pay. Remember the case of who is that? The Hasibuan, Otto Hasibuan, right? He was defending Jessica, right? Maybe for nothing, right? But that was a nationalized, that was a televised nationally, right? So many lawyers are willing to do that even without proper pay, or even without pay. So negligent mother, again, you see the case. This is easily decided, right? If you were a jury member, you could easily, you could easily know that this mother is negligent. This mother should be punished, right, as severe as possible, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years or 15 years. But look, right, now the mother has good lawyers. Then the good lawyers could make a lot of reframing, okay, a lot of arguments. Maybe the lawyers could build the case like this, right? So this mother had to go to a party because he needed to make money, and the party was paying her something, right? So he needed to go to the party to make money to give food to her daughter. You see, right? The framing is really powerful, right? By good lawyers, you never know, right? So you could say this lady had to go there to serve someone, just to get some food for her daughter. So it's like an accident, right? So now it sounds like an accident, not a negligence anymore. not the negligent action anymore. You see, good lawyers could reframe everything. So this is the unfair thing that happens to the Commonwealth system. Right? If you watch a famous movie, was it the Murder on the Orient Express? Right, you know that movie, right? So no, the classical version I think is better. The played by David Suchet, right? Instead of the new guy who is the cinema movie, right? The newer cinema movie. I think the classical one was a bit better in terms of the script and also the story building. So this story is a really sad story, but a very good one because this is toward the end of Hercule Poirot, right? The main character there. So you know that this guy, the Belgic detective, so he was rigid, he was very law-oriented, right? Very legalist, right? So he would defend a situation on which law was the top, right? So is unbending legalist, you know. But toward the end of his life, right? So he was getting older. So he was more compassionate, as shown in this story, right? The Hercule Poirot. So you see the story there. So he wanted to return to London, but he got stranded in, I don't remember, maybe Mesopotamia or Egypt, right? And he said, you know, he wanted to go back using Orient Express, right? The Orient Express train, the famous train. Today, you still can use it in Europe. I think it will cost maybe like 3,000, right? 3,000 for several days. So it's good train, and you should do it, right? Throughout your life, you have to do it at least once. Orient Express. So Hercule Poirot was planned to use the Orient Express at night, but that particular night, actually, Orient Express was full, right? The tickets were sold out, right? But again, the story was very interesting because Hercule Poirot met like the prescribed authority, right? Prescribed authority for the train. So this guy actually tried to show his acumen, his power, trying to show that he had power over the train. So he was saying to Hercule Poirot, you can enter, right? No problem, right? So, but actually, Hercule Poirot was saying to again the guy, right? Uh, I don't. I'm not in hurry, so I don't need to go into the train tonight. Maybe tomorrow night is okay, or 2 nights from now is okay too. But again, the guy tried to show his power to Hercule Poirot. So he was saying, okay, you can go to the train, right? Not a problem. But for the first, I think several nights, he had to share a room with someone else, making him very unhappy, right? But you see, what happened in the train, right? In the train, unbeknownst to everyone, right? Even unbeknownst to the train management and even to Hercule Poirot, one big family, right? Extended family, right? Including ex-drivers and something like that. Right? So one extended family was taking the train. Why was that so? The one big family wanted to kill one person there, right? They want to kill this person, right? What happened in the past in Chicago? This person killed a little girl, right? Killed a little girl,
Yeah.
and injured the whole family, right? All the whole family members were injured, and then the little girl was killed by this person. So they made a scenario, right? So they took the train, the whole is the extended family, with one purpose: to kill this person, this one person. And of course, because this is a story written by Agatha Christie, a big detective was there, right? This is like out of out of their imagination. Hercule Poirot was in the train, right? So what happened then? This person was killed, and you know the story, the rest of the story. So based on the investigation, the detective found out that actually the whole family stabbed this person. So, but what was the decision by this detective? So he chose to lie, right? He chose to lie to the police.
Yeah.
He was saying that there were outsiders coming in, like thief coming into the train to rob this person and ended up killing this person. That was the lie, right? And you know, in the original script, right, Hercule Poirot was walking away, crying because he lied. Right? So he was crying while walking away because he lied. Right? So the original version of the story. But what is the moral of the story? This shows that the United States law uh, couldn't give decision fairly in the court because this killing happened in Chicago, right? The killing of the girl happened in Chicago, and you know, mind you, the big family was coming from a wealthy family as well, so they didn't have any problem hiring good lawyers, but they still lost in the court to this person because of the uh, again unfair ability to hire lawyers, right? So again, you could learn from the movie, right? Quite really good story by Agatha Christie. I would suggest that you watch the original version played by David Suchet. Okay, so this is a summary, right? So essentially, tax preference theory is quite relevant, right? To many countries because again, the higher your income is, the higher attention you pay to the tax or the taxes that you have to pay, right? Then we'll see other newer and more modern theories like clientele effect, right? Right, in the beginning, remember we talked about the life cycle theory, right? From startup to mature firms, right? Life cycle theory, and this one is what clientele effect. So this clientele, we call it, you can call it also catering, like cater to someone, you cater someone, right? So catering theory that says that actually stockholders will choose the style of company that they want. Right? If they want a higher amount of dividend, then they will choose companies. They will buy the stocks of companies that pay a relatively higher amount of dividends, and vice versa. Right? If you don't like dividends, most likely you will find companies that don't pay a high amount of dividends. Next theory or hypothesis is signaling theory. Right? Signaling, we call it signaling because it conveys signal. So now this is important, right? And this is very different between the United States and other countries. So signaling means that it conveys signal, right? So is it true? Let's prove it now, right? Let's prove it. So I want to repeat something that we have discussed previously about the governance structure. In the United States, the highest board is what? Board of directors. Board of directors. So this board is comprised of directors, right? Directors are people who give directions, right? They give directions, right? And this board will supervise the board of management or board of executives, right? So board of management. And as discussed previously, who is the boss of this? Is the CEO, right? CEO with, of course, with his or her compatriots like CFO, COO, and other top executives. This is quite common in the world right now. This is using single tier system, right? So single tier system, right? So the CEO is automatically a member of the board of directors. Minimum a member, right? Minimum a member. But in many cases, the CEO is also the chair of the board of directors, right? So CEO is also the chair in many cases, right? But at least the CEO is a member of the board of directors, at least a member. But again, in many cases, he or she is also the chair of the board of directors. So you see in many on many TV programs or business magazines, you see a lot of profiles that say this guy is the CEO and chair of the board. It means that he or she is playing a dual function, right? CEO and also the chair of the board. So board of directors is representing the owners, right? Representing the owners. So dividend policy in the US, is decided or is made by the board of directors. Okay, so it's made by it's decided by the board of directors. Dividend policy, right? And you see the fact that we have a lot of stockholders. Right, we have hundreds of thousands, right, of stockholders, right? So because there are a lot of stockholders, remember our discussion, then nobody is like dominant, right? Nobody is dominant. Nobody is having maybe more than 4%, right? Except some institutional investors like Vanguard, right? Or some big mutual funds or hedge funds or something like that. So they might have up to maybe 9% or 10%, but individual investors would have less than 4%. If you have 4%, you might be the highest majority owner or shareholder, even with 4%. So other people will have like 0 point something, right? 0.1, 0.000 something percent, because you only have like limited lots of the stock, right? So hundreds of thousands of people, maybe close to 1 million. So they don't really, they're not really involved in the decision making, right? Because they are represented by the board of directors. Remember our story before, right? They would nominate directors, right? In the proxy statement of the last quarter of the year, usually. So they'll nominate directors and so, but they are not involved anymore, right? In the decision making. So board of directors will make the dividend policy, will enact the dividend policy. So that's why. So you could see a very simple situation here, very straightforward situation. When the board of directors is decided on a dividend policy, then the dividend policy will convey a strong signal. Strong signal to who? To your stockholders, right? Because again, they are not making their direct decision, right? They're represented by the board of directors. Now the board of directors is making the dividend policy. So of course, this will convey an important signal to stockholders or even to potential stockholders, right? Not only will the dividend policy convey signal to the existing stockholders, but they will also give information or give a signal to potential stockholders or outside investors, right? They have yet to be stockholders, but they're potential stockholders. So this will convey a lot of signal to many people. That's why signaling theory is very important in the United States, and this is so real, right? So here's the thing, right? In the United States, because of the signal, we will never decrease the amount of dividend. This can never happen because this would be interpreted as a dangerous situation, like prospectless company opinion, right? So they could interpret this signal as showing that the company has no prospect anymore because now it's going down, right? Going down. So because of the signaling, the strong signal that it conveys in the United States, no company will ever decrease its amount of dividend. So what is the consequence here? They will maintain it at least. They will maintain the amount of dividend, right? If if they are convinced that they could increase or they could maintain the amount of dividend in the future, then they will increase it. But usually they would be quite careful. They will increase it gradually to make sure that they could at least maintain it in the future. Otherwise, they will not increase it, right? If they, for example, if you have like if you have money coming from the sky, right, because of exchange rate, favorable exchange rate situation, right? Maybe you're having a lot of exposure in British pound, and it turns out that British pound appreciates. So suddenly you have plenty of money because of that, right? So money coming from the sky. So suddenly the appreciating pound gives you a lot of money, but you're not sure that next year or in subsequent years you can maintain such profit, right? The whatever the name is, right? The like the unexpected profit, right? So the loophole profit or whatever name you want to give. So you're not sure that in subsequent years you have such profit. So maybe you increase your dividend a bit, right? Only a little bit. Or if you have like a huge amount of money that's only available one time, then you would prefer to do the stock repurchase, right? So you repurchase your stock instead of paying a higher amount of dividends that you are not sure can be maintained in the future, right? So you'll be very careful. So we will not increase the amount of dividend unless we are sure that we can maintain the amount in the future, right? Next year or in years to come. Okay, so this is that's why the strong signal played by the dividend policy in the United States. So what about in another country? Let's look at Indonesia, right? So who is making the dividend policy in Indonesia? Oh, maybe I will start from the beginning. Okay, the highest board in Indonesian corporation is called what? Board of Commissioners. Right, the Board of Commissioners, conceptually or by law, will supervise the board of. This is quite misleading, right? So board of directors, right? But actually what we mean is the board of management actually, but the name has been, has been settled for a while, so it's quite difficult to change, right? So board of commissioners is supervising the board of executive directors, right? So it's a board of management. But right, the board of commissioners, actually both boards are quite weak in Indonesia because we have strong owners, right? Usually they have big proportion of ownership, right? Big dominant proportion of shareholding in every corporation, be it a state-owned enterprise or a private firm, right? Both of them. So you see, like in state-owned enterprises, the dominant owner is the government, right? Whereas in private firms, the most dominant owner is usually the family founder. So both are the same, right? It's dominated by certain individuals or a certain family or something like that, or the government, right? So dividend policy is made by groups, not by the board of commissioners, right? This is very different from the case in the United States. So dividend policy is made by the annual meeting, right? Annual meeting of shareholders. We call it RUPS, RUPS, right? The annual meeting of shareholders. So what do you think? What signal can you convey? Right? The owners have dominant position, right? Dominant proportion in a corporation. Then during the groups, right, during the annual meeting, they are making a dividend policy. So think about it, right? Think about it. Does the dividend policy convey any signal here? Not really, right? Because it's like giving a signal to yourself. Okay, so you're the dominant owner. In the groups, you can decide anything, right? Even if you want to fire anyone, right? You are not happy with certain executive, then you make groups tomorrow, right? We call it like the extraordinary groups, right? RUPSLB. You can make it tomorrow. You can fire anyone tomorrow because you're the dominant owner. So it doesn't really matter. Right? And in doing dividend policy making, in the groups, you decide how much dividend you want to pay. Maybe this semester you decide to pay 500 per stock. Next semester, zero, right? Zero per share. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because you're giving signal primarily to yourself as a dominant owner. It's very different from the case in the US. A board of directors is passing a dividend policy that will convey a huge signal to the existing stockholders and also to potential stockholders. But in this country, right, in Indonesia, dividend policy, what signal can you convey? You are conveying, or you're sending a signal to yourself as a dominant owner. It doesn't really matter. That's why you see the pattern of dividend in Indonesia. It doesn't show any model whatsoever. They can pay like 500 this semester. In the next 6 months, it will disappear. In the subsequent 6 months, they would pay like 300 or whatever. So there's no pattern. There's no dividend maintenance or something like that, right? Okay, so that's the dividend signal that's quite different, right, from one country to another. So now we are going to see residual distribution model. This is very easy. You see the name there, residual. Residual means remaining, right? Remaining. So if you have residual, or you have the remaining amount of money, then you could pay out the dividend. Otherwise, you will not pay out anything. That's why we call it residual distribution model. Residual distribution model. So we'll see an example here. So you have net income, right? You have say projected or even real net income that you have earned. Now you start making a projection, right, for the year to come, for subsequent year, how much capital expenditures you need, and then how much of the capital expenditures will be financed with equity. Right, so that's why this is a net income required by equity. So we'll see an example here, very easy example. So next year you need a capital expenditure of 112.5 million, right? And then you want to maintain your capital structure. This is something that we'll see tomorrow, right? The capital structure theory. So target capital structure that you want to maintain is 20% debt and 80% equity, okay? So 20-80 combination. So you want to maintain that, right? And you have a projected net income of 140 million, and the number of shares outstanding is 100 million shares. Okay, so it's quite easy. So you have a projected net income of 140 million, right? 140 million. Okay, this is the first scenario. How much capital expenditures again you need? 112, right? So next year you need a capital expenditure of 112.5 million. And out of the 112.5 million, you want to finance it with what? How much percent of equity? 80%, right? So 80% of 112.5 is a certain amount we'll see later, right? So this one. So 80% of 112.5 million is 90 million. Here, right? 90 million. So this is very easy, right? You have a projected net income of 140 million. And next year, you want to finance your capital expenditures with 90 million of equity. So how much remaining money do you have? Of course, 50, right? So you have 140 million. 90 million of it would has to be used for capital expenditures. Then you have a residual or a remaining amount of 50 million. So this 50 million could be paid out as dividends if you want, right? And how much is the dividend payout? 50 divided by your net income. 50 divided by 140 is 35.7%, right? So dividend that you plan to pay out here in this scenario is 50. Your net income is expected to be 140. So dividend payout ratio is forecasted to be 35.7%. What about the second scenario? The second scenario is showing a case where your projected net income is only 90. Okay, so you see, next year you require 80% of 112.5 as equity. So your required equity is again 90. Okay, 80% of 112.5 is 90. Right? So this year this scenario shows that you have a projected net income of 90. The capital expenditures to be financed by equity is 90. So how much remaining? 0. So this being the case, you are not supposed to pay any dividend, right? So dividend payout ratio should be 0 because you don't have any residual money to pay out as dividend. What about the third scenario? This shows that you have plenty here. You have plenty amount of money, 160 net income, whereas the required equity for your capital expenditures next year is only 90. So you have a residual amount of 70. So how much is the payout ratio? 70 divided by 160 is 43.8%. Very easy, right? The residual model. So what are some observations that we can do here? So fewer good investments would lead to smaller capital budget, of course, right? Again, when we're talking about the life cycle theory, if a company gets more and more mature, it will have fewer opportunities, also less requirement for future capital expenditures, right? So it could have more residual amount of net income, right? That's why an older firm, right, a more mature firm, has a higher chance to pay a higher amount of dividends, right? Because again, they don't have, or they have fewer potential investment to make, right? So they have plenty of money to distribute as dividends or to repurchase the stock. On the other hand, if you are a growing firm or you're a startup, right, you have a lot of potential investments that you still have to undertake. That creates a situation where you have to save money instead of paying it out too much as dividends, right? You have to save the money to reinvest and hopefully to achieve higher success, right? More successful investments or business efforts that you have been undertaking. So advantages of the model, this could give you, if I summarize it, right? So the main advantage of the residual distribution model would be, the guidance, right, or recommendation that it gives you as an executive. But if you are in Indonesia, this doesn't really make any difference, right? Because the owners to the RUPS or RUPS will make the dividend policy. But if you are in the United States or in other Western countries mostly, then this model, like the residual distribution model, could give you a guidance or a recommendation as to the amount of dividends that you could safely pay or pay out, or something like that. But the big disadvantage is the signal, right? The signaling theory that we just saw. Have to be careful with the signal. So we cannot entirely follow the residual distribution model because you will have to, increase and then decrease the dividend payout from time to time, right? And sometimes insignificant amount that will create a very dangerous signal to your stockholders or to your outside investors in the United States or in countries in some countries like that, right? So again, the disadvantage is that this distribution model, the residual distribution model, cannot be used as an absolute decision maker. Okay, you have to be careful. Of course, it can give you guidance, it can give you a recommendation, but still you have to pay a close attention to the signal that it will convey to your investors as a whole, right? And these are the procedures, quite standard. We have the name here, declaration date, happy date, right? Because you get the information there, declaration date. So the company will announce the amount of dividend and when it will be paid out and something like that, a declaration date. But these two are the dates that will be of big concern to many stockholders, because you see, ex-dividend date, if you hold the stock on this date or afterward, the new stockholders don't have the access or don't have the right to the prevalent dividend period, because here the ex 1 day before the ex-dividend date is usually the last day uh, that dividend, the current period dividend, will belong to the previous owners of the stock. Right? Okay, so on the ex-dividend date or afterward, the buyers or the new stockholders will not have the right to the current period dividend or the prevalent dividend. Right? The holder of record is just for recording, and of course the payment date. Actually, out of all the dates, again, the most important dates are the declaration date and also the ex-dividend date. You have to pay attention to that, right? The declaration date is usually the happy day, because dividend is announced, and we can start counting, right? And start estimating how much money we will make according to the number of lots that we have. Okay, now we'll move to stock repurchases. Okay, we just saw the first alternative of distribution, which was the dividend payout, right? Dividend payment, again, the classical style of distributing money to shareholders. Now, this is a more modern type of distribution. Right? We call it a stock repurchase or stock repurchases. So you repurchase your stock, you buy the stock back. So in accounting, if you keep the stock, right? You buy the stock back, you keep it. This will be called what? Treasury stock. Right? You hold it as a treasury stock, or you can use this. You can get the stock and then distribute to your executives or to your employees or anything. Right? So, what are the reasons? First reason, and the most important, I think, as an alternative to distributing cash as dividends. Oh, this is, I think, number one and number two. They are connected. Yeah. So if we have a situation like, again, the for the easy profit, right? The unexpected profit, right? The money coming from the sky, one-time cash, right? Because of the favorable position, maybe exchange rate position that is favorable, or maybe we just won a case in the court, right? We sued someone, we sued another corporation, and we won the case. Then we got a lot of money. Right? Maybe what's that? The patent infringement, right? Patent infringement case. We won a lot of money from our competitor or something like that. So we have one-time cash. So remember the case in the United States, right? You have to be careful with the signal. So if you suddenly increase the amount of dividend this year or this semester, but you're not able to maintain the amount next year, then your signal is detrimental, right? You have a catastrophic signal, and the stock price will plunge, right? Very dangerous. So you cannot just increase the amount of dividend, but knowing that you may not be able to maintain it in the future. So it's very dangerous, right? Very dangerous. Okay, so if you have like one-time cash such as this, it's better to do the stock repurchase, right? Better to repurchase your stock. Or the third one is you try to make a large capital structure change. You can imagine, like, if you buy the stock back, right, it means that you try to reduce the outstanding equity, meaning that you will enlarge your debt ratio, right? Because you're buying the active equity, right? It's being repurchased. So that will, of course, that will change the debt ratio, right? So the active debt would be increasing in proportion because you just repurchase a certain certain numbers of stock, right? And number 4 is also very important to use when employees exercise stock options. Of course, you cannot give empty promises to your employees, right? You give them like ESOP or employee stock option, either employee or executive stock option plan, right? Or employee stock option plan. So you promise them certain lots of your stock, right? And then when they want to execute, because maybe the price is good, right? It's like an option, right? They'll execute whenever they want, if the price warrants or if the price is favorable. If they execute and you don't have the stock, then that would be like an empty promise, right? That will tarnish your reputation. Nobody will ever trust you anymore, and this will bring a very bad precedent to the company, also to you as the executive. So this can never happen, right? So you have to find a way to fulfill your promises. You buy some stock back, right? And if your employees are executing their options, so they have the stock to give them, right, as part of the ESOP. Procedures, they announce the intent, and then you have several ways. You can do it just naturally. You can purchase in the market, right, on open market. So it's just natural, right? Just like we are trading stocks, right, buying and selling through our brokerage firm. Then make a tender offer. So you could give a tender offer to all of your shareholders, right? For example, the price right now is whatever, maybe BBNI, right? I'm very disappointed with BBNI, losing quite certain amount of money because of BBNI, right? So it's now what, 4,000? Crappy price, right? 4,000. Right? What if I, give a tender offer to my shareholders? So sell your stock back to me at 4,200. Possible, right? Possible. So I could give a tender offer to my shareholders. Okay, 4,200 or 4,300 or whatever, right? Tender offer. Or this one, the third one is interesting, right? Make a block or targeted repurchase. So maybe you don't like you don't like like certain shareholders or a group of shareholders, maybe another corporation that has ownership in this firm, then you try to kick them out by offering them the repurchase. Only some shareholders or some groups of shareholders, right? So you do a block, but this would be quite expensive because they will know, right? They will know. Similar to, I think, a case where, what's that? Inalum, right? Inalum was somehow, buying, but that looks like more like acquisition. Look at acquisition, but to some extent, this looks like repurchase as well, right? So they were repurchasing the stock, right, from the other party, right, from the other stockholder. So it's like this is a block repurchase, right, because they try to acquire a bigger proportion of ownership by buying or by repurchasing the stock from the other side or from the other stockholder. This one will be more expensive because they know that you want to kick them out, right? Or if you want to kick me out, you have to buy at a higher price, of course. In the beginning, beginning process will be more complicated because they know that you want to have a higher proportion or to be a dominant owner, right? Okay, so now we'll see the calculation. Okay, this is also the last segment of our discussion today. So we'll simulate a situation. This is a company where the value of operations, or we can call the value of the firm, is about 1,935. Okay, so in millions, so is 1.9 billion, right? 1.9 billion. This company has a short-term investment of 50. So short-term investments, such as like cash or marketable securities, right? The short-term assets, right? 50, and debt. It has debt of 387 millions, right? 0.5 millions, and the number of shares outstanding is 100. So let's see. If you pay like this is before, right? Before distribution, okay? So this is the value of operation. The value of operation 1,937. Short-term investment is 50. So the value of the firm, the net value of the firm is right. One billion 987.5 million. Right, that is the net value of the firm. This is the value of operations. This is the net value of the firm, right? The value of the firm. If we deduct that from the total value of the firm, then we will get the value of what? Equity, right? This is the total value of the firm. This is debt. Then of course, the difference would be the equity or the stock, right? We deduct that from the total value, then we'll get the amount of equity. So the amount of equity, if we divide the amount of equity by number of shares outstanding here, then we'll get the fundamental value of the stock, right? Fundamental value of the stock per share. So it's about $16 per share. So this is before distribution. So now we'll simulate, right? So let's say we are paying dividend. We choose dividend payment instead of stock repurchase. Let's see what will happen here. The value of operations is 1.9 billion. Now you use all your cash or your marketable securities to pay out the dividends, right? So you use it to pay out the dividends. Now you have nothing here. You pay it out, right? You pay 50 million as dividends. So now this is the value of the firm, right? The net value of the firm. Now you deduct that from the value, you get the equity, right? Well, the equity would be 1.5 billion somethings. Now you have 100 shares outstanding. Then the value of the stock will be what, 15.50 a share after you pay the dividend, right? So naturally, if the firm has announces its dividend payment, right, the declaration date, it will have to allocate a certain amount of money as the dividend payment, right? So the money has been allocated. So usually the stock price will decrease by the amount of dividend per share. You see the logic there, right? So it's from 16, it will drop, right? Naturally, it will drop to 15.50 because the dividend per share is 50 cents per share. We're paying 50 million, right? 50 million divided by number of shares outstanding, 100 million. So it's like 50 cents, right? 0.5. So the dividend per share is like 50 cents per share. That's why naturally the stock price will decrease by the amount of dividend per share after the after the declaration date, right? Because once you declare, you have to allocate the amount of money somewhere in an escrow account or in separate account, signifying that you have allocated the money for a dividend payment. So easy to imagine, right? So naturally, again, uh, after announcing the dividend policy, then usually the stock price will decline by the amount of dividend per share. That's very normal, right? Very normal. What about repurchase? Okay, stock repurchase, we'll see the effect. So before that, we try to estimate how many shares should be repurchased. You see the logic there, right? How many shares can you repurchase? This is reflected by what? The number of shares before minus the number of shares after the repurchase. It's logical, right? So you can imagine again, number of shares before the stock repurchase, and then you compare it to the number of shares after the repurchase. The difference would be the number of shares that is repurchased, right? So another way to estimate the number of shares repurchased is the available cash divided by the existing price. Common sense, right? So in our example, right, the example that we have been using so far, they have like 50 million, right? They have 50 million available for cash dividends. So 50 million is available. So how much is the current price? The current price before this one, right? 16, right? So you can imagine now you have 50 million. The share, the price per share is 16. Then if you divide the 50 million by 16 per share, that that will constitute the number of shares that can be repurchased, right? Or that is repurchased, right? It's quite logical, right? So we could rearrange the, you see, we can equalize them, right? Equalize the both equations. Then we could rearrange, right? We move it here, we move the other there. So we find this one. Number of shares afterward, right? Number of shares after repurchase is a function of the number of shares before repurchase minus uh, the ratio of available cash to the stock, the existing stock price, right? So number of the stock, number of shares before stock repurchase minus the available cash divided by the existing stock price. So we'll do it here. We'll apply it to our example here. So number of shares, number of forecasted shares outstanding, right, after the stock repurchase. So before we have 100 million shares outstanding, right? Let's show it again. See here, 100 million shares outstanding minus the available cash, 50 million divided by the existing stock price. So we find out that the number of shares outstanding after the repurchase would be 96 million, dropping from 100 million to 96.8 million. Right? Okay, so let's simulate for the stock repurchase. Previously, we saw the effect of dividend, right, on stock price. Right, so stock price will naturally drop by the amount of dividend per share after the dividend declaration, right? So what about repurchase? So we'll simulate this. This is the value of operations. Now you use 50 million to repurchase your stock. Not to pay dividend, right? But to repurchase your stock. Right? So this is the value, the net value of the firm, right? And then you deduct, you subtract debt from the total value. Then you get the amount of equity, right? So the amount of equity would be 1.5 billion, right? 1.55 billion, right? Now the number of shares outstanding is not 100 million shares, right? It has dropped, right? It has decreased, right, from our calculation, right, our estimation. From 100 million, this will decline to 96.8 million shares. It's reflected here, right, see? So when you divide 1.555 billion by 96.875 million, you find out that actually the price per share will not change. See, this is a different effect, right? Different impact between dividend and stock repurchase. So theoretically, if you do the stock repurchase, then the fundamental stock price will not change. It will remain the same. Why? Because although the amount of equity drops, right, the amount of equity declines from 1.6 billion to 1.55 billion, but the number of shares outstanding also decreases, right, from 100 million to 96 million. So when you divide the new numbers, both new numbers, you find out that actually the theoretical price or the fundamental stock price does not change, right? Doesn't change. This is a main difference from the dividend payout. So in the dividend payout, the theoretical price of the stock will drop by the amount of dividend per share. But the stock repurchase, the theoretical price will not change, right? Will remain the same, theoretically, right? Fundamentally. Okay, so before ending this session, so I want you to look again, right? So this, see, next name, maybe Adam. So I'll use Adam as example now. So again, for stock repurchase, there's no price effect, right? So the fundamental price will remain the same. It will not change because you see the effect there, right? New numbers, so new amount of equity divided by new number of shares outstanding. So we find out that actually the theoretical price should be the same. However, you know that every time a company is paying, or sorry, every time a company is repurchasing its stock price will go up, right? This is interesting, right? So you think about it theoretically. Again, the stock price should not change because again you see the configuration there, right? So the theoretical price should remain the same, but the reality shows that most of the time, but we're not saying that always, but almost always, right? So every time a company is repurchasing its stock price will increase, and this is less technical in nature by nature, but more psychological. So let me give you an example. So Adam, so let's say Adam, our friend here. Let's imagine this scenario, okay? This situation, okay? So if you study hard for a class, right, a course, and you expect to get, let's say, maybe A or at least A minus, but let's say you expect an A, right? You have studied hard for it. You think that you did well in exam, right? You submitted high quality assignments and something like that. So you expect to get an A, but it turns out that your result or the final grade that is announced shows that you get a C. So what will you do? Keep silent or complain? Complain, right? Complain, right? Of course, complain. So you expect to get an A, you think you perform well in the class, you get a C, right? You will complain. Right? So second scenario, right? Second scenario. If you expect, you think that you're not really into this course, a course, right? Not this one, right? You're not really into a course, right? It's like less interesting to you, and also maybe the the ambience, the atmosphere is also not interesting. So you expect to get maybe B, okay? B is good enough for you, okay? But it turns out, on the announcement day, you get an A. What will you do? Keep silent or complain?
Keep silent.
Keep silent, right? Keep silent, you see? So you expect to get a B. Keep silent, right? So, it turns out that you get an A, you keep silent, right? So similar to a corporation, if a corporation does something, we must suspect, right? The corporation must be like, doing something because it's not satisfied with the current condition. You see, right? Why I'm doing stock repurchase? Because I think the value is too low, or maybe I have plenty of amount of money that I want to shed. I want to shed the money, right? I want to disperse the money. So it must be interpreted as something wonderful, right? Something nice. That's why you're doing something, right? If you don't have something nice, you keep silent like this guy. Why should you do anything, right? If the company is not seeing any prospect or any potential, activities or anything to do, then it will keep silent, right? But if a company is doing like stock repurchase or is doing stock split, this is another topic, but you can imagine that stock split, you're announcing like certain corporate actions, then investors will interpret that information as something, something prospective, right? Why you are doing something is similar to this guy, right? Similar to this guy. You do something only if you are not satisfied, or your current situation is not satisfactory enough to you. That's why you do something. Right? That's why you see, in reality, stock repurchase again is followed or is followed by increasing stock price. Although fundamentally, actually, the stock price should not change. Right? It doesn't change anything. So advantages of repurchases: stockholders can choose to sell or not to sell. You can offer a tender, right? So it helps avoid paying a high dividend amount that cannot be maintained. This is in the U.S. and in mostly in Western civilization, right? In Western part of the world. Income received is capital gain. So remember, capital gain tax is always lower, right? I think everywhere in the world, although the numbers are different, right, from one country to another, but the pattern is usually the same. And this will give a positive signal, right? Because investors will see that you do something because you are not satisfied, right? Maybe the value is lower than it should be, right? We call it undervalued or something like that. Okay, so we'll end the video here. So thank you very much for watching, and see you in other videos. Hope it helps you comprehend the dividend distribution policy more. Thank you.